The phone was ringing in the kitchen, and I thought it might be Robert calling to check on me, like he usually did on Tuesday evenings. I picked up the receiver with a smile, ready to hear my son's voice, but instead of hearing, "Hi, Mom," I heard something that would shatter my world into a million pieces. "She's useless now, Patricia. We can't keep pretending she's capable of living alone." That was my son's voice, but he wasn't talking to me. He was talking about me. I should have hung up immediately. Any reasonable person would have. But something kept my hand frozen on that receiver. My ear pressed against the cold plastic as my heart hammered against my ribs. You know that feeling when you're watching a car accident happen in slow motion? That's exactly what this was, except the car was my entire life, and I was both the observer and the victim. "Mom's been forgetting things more often." Patricia's voice came through crystal clear. "My daughter, my baby girl, who I used to rock to sleep every night for 3 years when she had terrible nightmares. Last week she called me asking where Dad was. She forgot he died 2 years ago." I felt my knees buckle. Yes, I had asked about their father that one time, but I was having a particularly rough day. Grief isn't linear, and sometimes the missing hits you like a freight train. But forgetting? No, I hadn't forgotten. I just missed him so desperately that for one moment I let myself pretend he might walk through the door. Robert's voice cut through my thoughts like a blade. "The house is too big for her anyway. We could get a good price for it in this market. Split the money between us and use some of it for a nice facility." A facility. They were talking about putting me in a nursing home and selling the house that I had turned into a home for 43 years. The house where I had nursed them through chickenpox and broken hearts, where I had packed thousands of school lunches and waited up countless nights when they were teenagers, where their father and I had slow danced in the kitchen on Sunday mornings while pancakes sizzled on the stove. "She won't like it at first," Patricia continued, and I could almost see her shrugging the way she did when she was being practical about something unpleasant. "But honestly, Robert, what choice do we have? She's becoming a burden." Burden. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from falling. 43 years of motherhood, and I had become a burden. 43 years of scraped knees kissed better, report cards celebrated, graduation parties thrown, wedding expenses paid, grandchildren spoiled, and now I was simply useless. But you know what the strangest part was? I didn't hang up. Something deep inside me needed to hear it all. Maybe it was the same instinct that makes you press on a bruise to see how much it hurts. Maybe it was because I had spent so many years trying to be the perfect mother that I needed to understand exactly how badly I had failed. "The place I looked at yesterday has activities," Robert was saying. "Arts and crafts, movie nights. She might actually be happier there with people her own age. Arts and crafts." As if I were a child who needed to be entertained with glue sticks and construction paper. I wanted to laugh, but I was afraid if I started, it would come out as a sob. These were the children I had taught to tie their shoes, to ride bikes, to drive cars. I had cheered at every soccer game, attended every school play, celebrated every achievement as if it were my own. Because it was my own. Their successes had been my greatest joy. "When do you think we should tell her?" Patricia asked. "Soon," Robert replied. "I'll handle it. You know how Mom gets emotional about these things." Emotional? Yes, I suppose wanting to stay in my own home, surrounded by a lifetime of memories, would be considered emotional. I suppose not wanting to be warehoused with strangers while my children divided up the pieces of my life would be seen as an inconvenience. I finally found the strength to hang up the phone, but the damage was done. The silence in my kitchen felt deafening. the same kitchen where I had fed my family thousands of meals, where we had laughed and argued and shared our days. Now it felt like a museum of a life that apparently no longer mattered. The days after that phone call blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I found myself moving through my house like a ghost, touching things that suddenly felt temporary. The china cabinet that had belonged to my mother, the family photos covering every surface, the garden outside my kitchen window where I had taught both children to plant tomatoes. None of it felt like mine anymore. You know that feeling when you realize you've been living someone else's idea of your life? That's what hit me as I sat in my husband's old chair, staring at walls covered with pictures of family gatherings where I was always in the background, always serving, always making sure everyone else was happy and fed and comfortable. When was the last time someone had asked me what I wanted? I started paying attention to things differently. When Robert called for our usual Tuesday check-in, I listened not just to his words, but to his tone. Was that impatience I heard when I told him about my day? When Patricia stopped by with the grandchildren, was she really visiting me or just fulfilling an obligation? Mom, you seem distant lately, Patricia said during one of these visits, while her 8-year-old son played on my living room floor. Are you feeling all right? I almost laughed. Distant. Yes, I suppose I was distant from the version of myself who had lived to please everyone else. I'm fine, dear, I told her, the same response I had given to that question for decades. But this time, I wondered what would happen if I told the truth. What if I said, "No, I'm not fine. I heard you and your brother planning to throw me away like an old piece of furniture." But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I started noticing other things, like how my neighbor, Helen, always waved when she saw me in the garden. She was about my age, lived alone since her husband passed, and somehow she seemed lighter than I felt, more herself. One morning, I found myself walking over to her fence. "Dorothy," she called out warmly, "how lovely to see you out here. Your roses are absolutely gorgeous this year." We talked about gardening, about the weather, about nothing important. But you know what struck me? Helen talked about her plans. She was taking a pottery class at the community center. She had joined a book club. She spoke about the future like it belonged to her. "Don't you ever get lonely?" I asked her, because it was the question I was afraid to answer about myself. Helen considered this seriously. "Sometimes," she said, "but lonely and alone are two different things. I was lonelier when I was trying to be who everyone else needed me to be." Her words stayed with me for days. Was that what I had been doing? Trying to be who everyone else needed me to be? The perfect mother, the devoted wife, the uncomplaining widow who never caused trouble or had needs of her own. I started thinking about the woman I had been before I became a mother. I had loved to read, had dreamed of traveling, had been good with numbers, and had thought about going back to school for accounting. But then the children came, and being a mother became my full-time identity. Every dream, every ambition, every interest had been put aside for their needs. But now they were grown. They had their own lives, their own families, their own dreams. And according to that phone conversation, they saw me as nothing more than an aging inconvenience to be managed. You know that feeling when you realize you've been holding your breath for years? That's what it felt like when I finally admitted to myself that I was angry. Not just sad or hurt, but genuinely angry. I had given them everything, and they couldn't even be bothered to ask me what I wanted before planning out the rest of my life. The anger was terrifying at first. Good mothers weren't supposed to be angry with their children. Good mothers were supposed to sacrifice endlessly and smile while doing it. But the anger also felt like waking up after a very long sleep. 3 weeks after overhearing that phone call, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to the woman I had been a month earlier. I called my old friend Margaret, who had become a real estate agent after her divorce. Margaret, I said, I need to understand exactly what my house is worth, not because I wanted to sell it, but because I needed to understand the stakes of the game my children thought they were playing without me. Margaret came over that afternoon, walked through every room, took notes, and gave me a number that made my eyes widen. Robert and Patricia weren't wrong about the market. Are you thinking of downsizing, Dorothy? Margaret asked kindly. I'm thinking of taking control, I replied, and I meant it. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I poured myself a glass of the good wine, the bottle I had been saving for a special occasion, and I sat down with a legal pad and started writing. Not a grocery list or a birthday card, but a list of everything I wanted from the rest of my life. I wanted to travel to Ireland, where my grandparents had come from. I wanted to learn to paint. I wanted to read all the books I had put aside when the children were small. I wanted to make decisions without consulting anyone else first. I wanted to matter to someone again, even if that someone was just me. By the time I finished that list, it was nearly midnight, and I felt more awake than I had in years. You know that feeling when you remember who you used to be before life taught you to make yourself smaller? That's what was happening to me, and it was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, I called a lawyer, not to plan my funeral or update my will, but to understand my options. What were my rights? What could I do with my house, my money, my life that didn't require anyone else's permission? Mrs. Dorothy, the lawyer said after I explained my situation, you're completely competent to make your own decisions. If you don't want to sell your house or move to a care facility, no one can force you to. Even my children? Even your children, unless a court declares you incompetent, which would require significant medical evidence, you have every right to live your life as you choose. I left that meeting feeling like I was walking on air. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not someone's mother or someone's widow, but Dorothy, just Dorothy, and that was enough. 2 days later, Robert called with that familiar tone I now recognized as barely concealed impatience. Mom, I'd like to come over this weekend. Patricia, too. We have some things we need to discuss with you. Of course, dear, I said sweetly. Why don't you come for Sunday dinner? I'll make your favorite pot roast. I spent Saturday preparing, but not just the meal. I prepared myself. I chose my best dress, the blue one that brought out my eyes. I set the dining room table with my wedding china, the set I had been saving for special occasions. This was going to be special, all right. Sunday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. Robert and Patricia showed up together, which told me they had coordinated this intervention. They brought flowers, gilt flowers, I realized, and complimented the house, the meal, everything except the conversation they were clearly dreading. We made small talk through dinner, the grandchildren, work, the weather, but I could feel the tension building like a storm front moving in. Finally, as I served dessert, Robert cleared his throat. Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. Do we? I asked pleasantly, cutting into the apple pie I had made from scratch. What about it concerns you? Patricia jumped in, her voice overly bright. We just think you might be happier somewhere with more support, more activities, people your own age. You mean a nursing home, I said calmly, and watched them both flinch. Not a nursing home, Robert said quickly. An assisted living community. I found a really nice one about 20 minutes from my house. You could have your own apartment, but there would be help available if you need it. And meals provided, Patricia added. No more cooking or cleaning. Wouldn't that be nice? I took a bite of my pie, chewed thoughtfully, and then set down my fork. You know, I said conversationally, The strangest thing happened a few weeks ago. I picked up the phone, and I could have sworn I heard someone talking about me, about how useless I am, about selling my house, about what a burden I've become. The color drained from both their faces. Mom, Robert started, but I held up my hand. I didn't hang up, I continued. I probably should have, but I wanted to hear all of it. Every word about how inconvenient I've become, how you could split the money from selling this house, how I might be happier making arts and crafts with people my own age. Patricia looked like she might cry. Mom, we never meant. Yes, you did, I said, and my voice was steady as steel. You meant every word, and you know what? I'm grateful I heard it, because it woke me up from a very long sleep. I stood up and walked to the china cabinet, pulling out the folder I had prepared. This is an appraisal of this house. Margaret Henderson did it for me last week. You were right about the market value. Robert's eyes widened as he looked at the number. Mom, this is more than you expected? Yes, it is. Enough to set you both up very nicely after I'm gone. But here's the thing, children. I'm not gone. I'm very much here, very much alive, and very much capable of making my own decisions. I pulled out another set of papers. These are from my lawyer. Did you know that as long as I'm mentally competent, no one can force me to sell my house or move anywhere I don't want to go? It's quite liberating, really. You know that feeling when you finally stand up for yourself after years of being pushed around? It's like stepping into sunlight after being in a cave. It's terrifying and magnificent at the same time. We're worried about you, Patricia whispered. Are you? Or are you worried about your inheritance? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Because if you're genuinely concerned about my well-being, you might have asked me what I wanted instead of planning my life behind my back. Robert found his voice first. What do you want, Mom? It was the first time in years that anyone had asked me that question directly. I want to live in my own home for as long as I'm able. I want to make my own decisions. I want to travel and learn new things and stop living my life in service to everyone else's expectations. But if something happens to you, Patricia began. Then something happens to me, I interrupted. But it will happen to me in my own house, surrounded by my own things, living my own life, not warehoused somewhere convenient for the two of you to visit when guilt demands it. I sat back down and looked at my children, really looked at them. They seemed smaller somehow, younger, like the scared kids they had once been when they realized they couldn't manipulate me into giving them what they wanted. I love you both more than my own life, I said softly. I gave you everything I had to give, and I don't regret a moment of it. But I'm done shrinking myself to make room for your convenience. I'm 62 years old, not 92. I have good years left, and I intend to live them on my own terms. The silence that followed felt eternal. Patricia was crying quietly, and Robert was staring at his hands. You know that feeling when the truth is finally out in the open and there's nowhere left to hide? That's where we were. Are you angry with us? Patricia asked in a small voice. I considered the question seriously. I was, I admitted. Furious, actually. But anger is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my energy now. Like what? Robert asked, and for the first time in months, he sounded genuinely curious rather than worried. I smiled, and it felt like the first real smile I had worn in ages. Well, I've enrolled in a pottery class at the community center. Helen from next door convinced me to join her book club, and I've made a reservation for a trip to Ireland next spring. Their faces showed their surprise. This wasn't the mother they knew, the one who asked permission before buying herself a new dress. Ireland? Patricia said. By yourself. With a tour group, actually. Apparently, there are quite a few people my age who want to see the world without waiting for someone else to approve the itinerary. I pulled out one more paper from my folder, and I've made some changes to my will. Both children tensed, and I realized they were expecting me to disinherit them out of spite. But that wasn't who I was, even in my newfound independence. I've set aside money for a trust that will pay for any care I might need as I age. Real care, not just the cheapest option. The house will still go to both of you eventually, but only after I'm actually gone, not just inconvenient. Robert looked ashamed. Mom, we never said you were inconvenient. Didn't you? A burden who's becoming useless? I kept my voice gentle because I could see he was remembering his words and feeling their weight. We were scared, Patricia whispered. Scared of watching you get older, scared of making the wrong decisions for you, scared of losing you the way we lost Dad. And there it was, the truth underneath their cruelty. They were grieving too, anticipating a loss that hadn't even happened yet, trying to control what couldn't be controlled. Oh, my darlings, I said, and for the first time in our conversation, my voice was purely maternal. I'm not going anywhere yet, but when I do, I want to go as myself, not as some diminished version you've created to make my leaving easier to bear. Patricia came around the table and hugged me then, really hugged me, not the quick, duty-bound embraces we had been exchanging. I'm sorry, Mom, we were wrong. Robert joined us, my big, strong son, who used to cry when he stepped on ants as a little boy. We just don't want to lose you. You won't lose me by letting me be myself, I told them. You'll lose me by trying to turn me into someone manageable. You know that feeling when a storm finally passes and the air feels clean and new? That's what happened in my dining room that afternoon. We talked for another 2 hours, really talked, not just exchanged pleasantries and concerns. They told me about their fears, their marriages, their children, their dreams. I told them about mine. When they left, Patricia kissed my cheek and said, "Tell me about this pottery class." "Come with me next week and see for yourself," I offered. "I'd like that," she said, and I could tell she meant it. After they left, I stood in my kitchen washing dishes and looking out at my garden. The tomatoes were finishing for the season, but there were still roses blooming along the fence. Next year, I thought, I might plant something different, something I had never tried before. The phone rang, and for just a moment my heart seized. But it was Helen from next door. "Dorothy, how did your talk with the children go?" I had told her about the conversation I had overheard, about my plans to set the record straight. She had been my cheerleader through the whole process. "Better than I expected," I told her. "Harder than I hoped." "The good conversations usually are," she said wisely. "Are you still planning to come to book club tomorrow night?" "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, and realized I was already looking forward to it. After I hung up, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat in my living room, really looking at it for the first time in months. Not seeing it as something that would soon be sold and divided, but as my space, my sanctuary, my home. There were changes I wanted to make. The wallpaper in the guest room was from the 1980s and made the room feel dark. I could paint it something cheerful, maybe yellow. The garden could use some fall cleanup, and I was thinking about adding a small greenhouse for winter growing. For the first time in years, I was making plans that extended beyond next week's grocery shopping. I was thinking in seasons and years, not just in days of diminishing usefulness. 6 months later, I was kneeling in my garden, planting bulbs for next spring's flowers, when the phone rang inside the house. But this time, I didn't rush to answer it. The machine could get it. I was busy living. You know that feeling when you realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be? That's what hit me as I patted soil around the daffodil bulbs that would bloom long after this winter passed. I was 62 years old, and I was finally becoming myself. The Ireland trip had been everything I had hoped for and more. I had seen the village where my great-grandmother was born, had kissed the Blarney Stone, had made friends with other adventurous spirits who refused to let age define their possibilities. Patricia had been so inspired by my photos that she was planning her own solo trip to Italy. The pottery class had led to a small exhibition at the community center, where 3 of my pieces had actually sold to strangers who saw something worthy in my work. Robert had bought one of my vases and displayed it prominently in his living room, telling everyone about his mother's artistic talents. But the best part wasn't the external validation or the new experiences. It was the simple pleasure of waking up each morning and asking myself, what do I want to do today? Instead of, what does everyone else need from me? When I finally came inside, dirty and satisfied from the garden, I checked the answering machine. It was Patricia. Hi, Mom. Just calling to see how you're doing. Robert and I were talking, and we wanted to know if you'd like to come to dinner Sunday. The kids have been asking for your stories about Ireland. Call me back when you get a chance. Love you. I smiled as I saved the message. Then I called her back. Patricia, it's Mom. Sunday dinner sounds lovely. Can I bring dessert? I've been experimenting with a new recipe. That would be perfect, Mom. Are you doing okay? You sound happy. I am happy, sweetheart. Really, genuinely happy. Good, she said, and I could hear her smiling through the phone. That's all we ever wanted. And you know what? I believed her. Because sometimes it takes hearing the worst about yourself to find the courage to become the best version of yourself. Sometimes you have to lose who you thought you were to discover who you really are. That phone call I overheard 6 months ago, the one where my children called me useless, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to stop living their version of my life and start living my own. To anyone listening who feels invisible, who has been told they're too old, too much trouble, too anything, you are not useless. You are not a burden. You are not done writing your story. Pick up the phone. But this time, make sure you're the one doing the talking. The daffodils I planted that day bloomed beautifully the next spring, and so did I.